Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 169 of the podcast, where I interview a guy I got to meet at a conference, and we talk a little bit about that conference called Next. And his name's Robert Purvey. Robert is a youth pastor at a pretty large church in the Dallas area. And Robert and I talk about youth ministry and what it looks like at his church, how he connects with schools to reach youth there in football games and things like that, how he connects with other youth pastors in the area, and then they kind of work together to create something for their community, which is pretty interesting. They have lots of large churches in their area. That's not true for everyone, certainly not true where I live, but I love hearing how they work together. And you'll hear how we talk about the differences in terms of race and demographics, because he works at a church that's largely a black church, and there's a few of those in that area. And then there's some other churches that are largely white churches, and in many ways they don't work together, but in some ways they do. And so we talk about all of that. We have a conversation about race as well, and what that means in ministry, but even youth ministry specifically. So I always love hearing about how other youth ministries operate. You'll hear that Robert leads that ministry there with mostly youth volunteers, very few adult volunteers for the number of students they have, and that only works because of the number of student volunteers they have. So you're going to love this conversation. You can get all the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 169. But let's listen in now with my conversation with Robert Purvey about youth ministry inside and outside the church. Well, today I'm talking with Robert Purvey. Welcome to the podcast, Robert.
Thanks, man. You all right?
Yeah, I'm doing well, man. Robert, so I know you from Next, a gathering that Orange has put together for next-gen pastors and, youth ministry leaders. Like, that is a small gathering, like 100 people. And like This past year, one of the things we did was, it was like they had like this Enneagram thing, right? And you and I were two of the Enneagram, two of the Enneagram 8s in the room. And
right.
There's, I don't know, it was like 6 or 7 of us, not many. And so we got to be the Enneagram 8 brothers and work on our little project there, which I won't tell anybody else about. But if anybody listening is a next-gen pastor, family pastor, oversees, ministry from infants through high school or college, they should sign up, because it actually registration's opened up for January. But tell us a little bit about you and your church and your role there, Robert.
So I serve as youth and young adult pastor. It's kind of we're moving towards the family ministry model at the Antioch Fellowship Church in Dallas, Texas, southwest side of Dallas, Texas. One of the larger, predominantly African-American churches in Dallas, about 5,000 people. So I serve about 500 to 600 teenagers and about 400 or 500 young adults on a weekly basis. So a lot of work, but a lot of fun work. So I love it.
Yeah, that's a large ministry right there. So tell us, and we're going to focus probably more specifically on the student ministry, though. Gosh, I'd love to talk again about the young adult ministry, maybe in a separate conversation. But give us an overview of like what student ministry looks like. What's a weekly schedule, programming? Kind of what does that look like at your church?
So we offer in 7 days. We offer 4 times for ministry. So we do Sunday morning services. The way our schools and neighborhoods are structured here in Dallas, it's kind of hard to do a Wednesday night service. So we do Sundays, but we offer Tuesday night mentor ministries, Wednesday is fine arts, and Thursday is Bible study. And so out of 7 days in the week, we offer 4 times for ministry. So
okay. Yeah. Tell me that again. So Sunday morning is when they're Sunday primarily morning, gathering, but then Tuesday is
our mentoring ministry. So we have Virtue for our girls, Boys to Men for our boys. Then Wednesday is fine arts so we have a choir, we have dance ministry, things of that nature, and then on Thursdays we have our Bible study, our Connect Bible study for teenagers.
Gotcha. Now, and are you at all of these things? I mean, that's a full week there.
So Sunday, of course, primarily Sunday. I'm not here on Tuesdays, but I'm around Wednesdays and Thursdays. So my off days during the week are usually Tuesdays and Fridays.
Gotcha. Yeah. And one of the things we're going to talk about is partnering with schools. But before we do that, I want to know, like, with these 3 opportunities during the week plus Sunday. Would you say that like most of the students are doing at least Sunday plus one other thing? Or are they doing a bunch of them? Like, how's that work?
So I don't know how it is in any other part of the world or the nation, but here in Texas, football is right next to Jesus, And
right next is a good way to say it. Not exactly below.
And for some people, football may be a little higher, but it's during the fall. It's almost nearly impossible to really get traction on anything because football season also means band season, and then volleyball season is in that, and then cheerleading, and so we during the fall we don't see a lot of consistent attendance when it comes to anything, whether it be worship or our sub ministries. But as soon as we come back from Christmas break, so around mid-January, early February, we take off. It's so funny. I've been doing this year, made 12 years. I've been doing ministry full time. And it's funny, every year it happens. So for instance, we'll average 20 to 25 kids for our mentor ministries on Tuesdays during the fall. Right after we come back from Christmas break, it goes from 25 to like 50, like automatically.
Yeah.
No joke. And so that's so those ministries are structured. But we win in our area in the southwest sector of Dallas County. It's real weird. We have at least 6 churches within a 2 to 3 mile radius of our church that all have over 5,000 people.
Wow. Gosh, we have like one of those in my state. Maybe 2.
It's crazy. Nick, it's crazy. So TD Jakes in the Potter's House is not that far, about 10 minutes away. Pastor Tony Evans in Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship right around the corner. Pastor Brian Carter in Concord Church. Those are a few churches that people may know of right around the corner. So we're all in the same area. So the beautiful thing about that, we all serve the same schools.
Yeah.
And so being able to have a unified front of youth pastors that get involved in our schools is great. And on that subject, Nick, we have maybe 4 or 5 cities or communities that are within 10 to 15 minutes of the church. So parents getting their kids to church is not a problem because we're right there in the middle of everything. And so our church is in between those suburbs and downtown. So parents are either going to work, coming from work, and the kids are right there. So we win being in close proximity to a lot of our schools and communities.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk more about how you partner with schools in your community. I think that sounds like that's something that's unique. And I didn't know that you did, there's like kind of a partnership with these other churches too. I'd love to hear more about that. So what does that look like? How do you partner with the schools that are so close?
So we'll do schools and then we'll talk about the churches. So with the schools, I found out in my year 2 of youth pastoring, I found an organization called Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA. And I met with a guy that was over FCA, and I became what they call a character coach. And so working with different head coaches on the teams in the schools. What happened with that is, who are the most popular kids in the school? Athletes. Mm-hmm. And so who can be more influential, who can draw crowds? It's athletes. So being involved in the locker rooms, I began to realize the influence we had on campuses. So we were able to join in on mentoring efforts at school, the schools had, and able to be more of a presence on our school campuses. And one thing I realized is that going into the schools, not seeing what we as a church could do for the school, what the school could do for us, but really, what can we do for the school? What do you need from us? We don't want to come and make your school another one of our locations. We really want to come and just serve you, serve the students, serve the teachers. And that's been such a win for us. So we periodically do lunch for school staffs. We'll sponsor lunch. We'll get one of the local restaurants to sponsor lunch. So that helps in both ways. It builds a partnership with that restaurant, and it helps us build a partnership with the school, and and vice versa. So we'll do that. We'll do periodic events at the school. So we'll do game nights. We'll do block parties. We have a thing we do. We tailgate. We find 3 to 4 biggest football games of the year, and we tailgate before the games. And so we have cornhole, and we'll some of the guys from the church will come and make hot dogs, and we'll just tailgate. And so have T-shirts made, and the kids from the church that go to those schools are just super excited about their church being on campus. And so it's wild. It's crazy. We go to pep rallies and all that.
That's great. Yeah. So, and then it sounds like the school's very open to the partnership too. I mean, they're like, yeah, do the tailgate here, do these games. That's a great relationship.
Because we're in the Bible Belt, so we're blessed to have a lot of believers that are in position in schools, so we don't get a lot of resistance. But what the model we've made, it can translate whether you're in a city that has a lot of churches or not. You can still use this model because it's all about fellowship and connecting, to where it's not aggressive, it's not overbearing. It's literally the church connecting with the community, and you can win with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm up here, not in the Bible Belt in Maryland, and one of our church plants meets in a high school, and they've just had they serve them, initially in the early stages of that partnership, and it's made a great relationship. I mean, they store some of their equipment there, and it all started just with serving them and getting connected to them like people. So it wasn't maybe something that was already established or normal, because it wasn't like no other church was partnering with them, but it wasn't like it was that hard for them to get in there. That's good. Now, what does this look like with these other churches? How do you all, is it just relational? Hey, we're all kind of on the same page. If these students go to any church, great. I mean, like that, or is there some intentional effort to plan things together?
So I realized when I first came on board, I realized how all the churches were so close, but everybody was in their own territorial silo, right? Nobody was really working together. And so me along with some former youth pastors that were in the neighborhood, because I've tripled a youth pastor tenure, right? I've been here 12 years, so
yeah, true.
But I've been able to build partnerships with churches and their. It's so much so to where senior pastors in the community will ask me who the next youth pastor should be. So it's pretty cool. I get to navigate and build relationships with guys that come in, and so it's really just it's a unit of youth pastors. And we literally talk on how we can connect our churches and how we can connect our schools. And so we meet periodically, we do lunch and we talk and we strategize, and then we support each other's events. So we go to things at each other's churches, and then whatever we do on the campus, we try to do a couple of events together. So we have a thing called the fifth quarter that we do at one of our high schools. And the fifth quarter is literally sponsored with a partnership with FCA, but all of our churches. So all the 4 or 5 youth pastors in the neighborhood, we come together and we put it in our budgets. So we come together and we all pitch in and we put our hands on it and we get our kids involved in it. And we do this fifth quarter event, and it's bananas because every church has been promoting it. Every kid that are in leadership position, not just at their church, but also at their school, they're promoting it. And so when they come to the fifth quarter event, it's full of food, games. It's after a football game. And so we have a game guy that does huge group games. He comes out and does a lot of group activities. We give away stuff. And then at the end, we present the gospel message. And kids are saved by it because it's a tag team effort. We have a student who is a believer will come and present Jesus to students. And then we'll have one of the youth pastors come behind and just really, in a more deeper way explain and then offer salvation. And it's crazy. One event, we had about 300 kids get saved.
Wow, that's awesome. And you say it's after a football game. Is it like, I'm picturing multiple football games. Do you just pick a location or how's that work?
So we definitely do one, but we try to do 2. We've done it maybe 5 years, but we do one. And what happens is we just pick a major football game where we know a lot of kids will be. So of course we get security involved. We make the school known and make sure everything is safe, make sure everything is good. But we make sure we do a high impact game. So we don't want a game where, one of the schools plays and somebody's going to blow out. We want to play. We want a good game. That way we have a lot of kids. And so we do that. And we have connection cards too. So what we do is we actually get information from the kids to see where they are in the city, and we plug them in with a student ministry that's close to where they are.
Okay, so it's just geographic, because that was my next question is not even just as a group as you're working with other leaders, but how does your partnership with schools, bridge students to the church? Sounds like that's one way is you connect them just based on location, which is, again, great that you're sharing that. Any other ways that you're connecting them to church, even if it's something you're not necessarily partnering with other churches for?
And so FCA is very strong as well because FCA has 2 components. You have the character coach component, which I do, which you go in and speak to the teams and build relationship with the teams. But you also have the student-led huddles, which meet every Friday. And so these are athletes who invite their friends from the school. These are believers. And so pastors can come in and speak and talk and bring things in that way.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't, if there's anything else about partnering with schools, I'd love to hear it. I also want to shift gears to talk about how students lead in your ministry, because I know that's unique. But anything else you want to add about partnering with schools?
I guess for any family pastor, youth pastor listening to this podcast, it's very important that you connect with your schools. I think connecting with the schools in your community, it will probably be the biggest win for your youth ministry, because we invite kids to our churches. Mm-hmm. Like we never do a pitch to invite kids to our events. What happens is when you are a consistent and familiar presence on campus, they want to come to where you are. Mm-hmm. They want to come to what you have, because two things are working. You're consistently present and your kids are consistently pushing. So those are two things. You're consistently present and your kids are consistently pushing. So those two together just helps you win without you having to beg kids to come to church.
Well, yeah, and I guess it's easier too for your kids to invite. I mean, that's something every youth pastor wants, even children's pastor wants, is for their own kids to be able to invite their friends and things like that. And like you're saying, if there's a trusted person there they can point to, that makes it easier for them.
So one thing we're working on now, Nick, making sure that student ministries in the area are ready for students to come to their ministry. All right. So making sure ministries ready, because what happens is you can build a relationship, your kids can invite them, but when they come to your student ministry, what are they coming to? Will they be bored out of their mind? Yeah. Are people mean? They treat them bad because they're not church kids? How does that look? So all of that has to be discussed within your strategy and your team model to make sure that you're a welcoming place.
Yeah, and it's good that you're helping other churches. I mean, that's just an awesome kingdom effort partnering together there that you all have. That's great. Well, let's shift gears then and talk a little bit about, like, in your church's programming, you got Sunday morning, you got these 3 things during the week. Students are leading in a big way. Like the way you described it is it wouldn't run without them. So give us some specifics. Like, what does it look like on Sunday morning? What does it look like during the week in terms of students leading?
So we train our students. We have a training. We train specifically between February and the end of the summer. So from February to end of July, August, we're training our students at least one day a week. And these are our leaders. To where they come in and they're learning how to lead, what leadership looks like, a Jesus model of leadership, all of that. And they're being pushed in that area. But our ministry is a student-led ministry shepherded by a pastor. That's what we say. That students lead the ministry, but a pastor shepherds it. And what happens is our teens, so I'll give you an example. On Sunday morning, all I do is preach. All I do is preach on Sunday morning. And even with that, in the service, we have students who and I'll back up. So every week we have a Bible verse or a scripture. That's our scripture for the week. What is the Lord speaking to us as a ministry through this scripture? And what we'll do, we'll send it out through all of our connection platforms. So through our text messages, through our emails, on our Instagram pages and all that, we'll make sure that kids get the scripture for the week. And there's a student every week that speaks for about 3 to 4 minutes in service on what that scripture means textually and what that scripture means to them. And so what it does is allow teens to verbally expound on the word, to present the word to other teens. And it just helps them go deeper in the Bible, because we randomly select. You never know who's going to get selected to do it, right?
Okay. Yeah. Little pressure.
Absolutely. And so that's one way. But our services are led by, so everything from media to the flow of service, our worship team, students. So the only thing that's not student led are we have a couple of adult musicians and then adult preacher. But other than that, our students run everything from greeting students at the door, from being in the hallway and saying hello, from the flow of service to even at the altar call, from being intercessors. Our teens are present in every area in our worship services.
So give me an idea, like how many students are coming to a service, and then how many adult volunteers are helping out? Because it sounds like if students are leading this big way, I would imagine the adult volunteer number is lower, or they're there to help. Yeah. So give us a little picture. What are we talking about? Like how many students are serving versus how many adults, how many are there, all that?
So we average between 175 and 200 teens a Sunday in our service. And so we have about 4 or 5 adult volunteers that serve every Sunday. And
wow.
so
And that's how you do it, because you got 4 or 5 adult volunteers, but you got all these students in volunteer roles. Yeah.
Absolutely. And everybody is on a rotation. So even our leaders, because we believe that you shouldn't be serving every Sunday. You need to be fed as well. So all of our student leaders and our adult leaders are on rotation. So you have first and third Sunday, then second and fourth Sunday. So you never serve 4 straight Sundays consistently. Yeah, you have a break in between. Or you never serve 4 straight weeks consistently. You have a break in between.
How many students are volunteering typically on a week?
Maybe about 10.
Okay.
In leadership roles. Now, what happens is we have a leadership team, our 412 leadership team. It's comprised maybe 12 to 15 students. And the win we have with that is that these students are commissioned to galvanize and recruit teens in the ministry to be a part of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the leaders doing everything. They have to recruit other teens to be involved. For instance, we have our greeters, our welcoming team. These are the teens who are excited at the door, who usher kids in, who make them excited. There's a kid who's never been to church before. These are the kids who make them feel welcome. Take them to our green room, some juice, some donuts, whatever, love on them, bring them in. These are the teens that do that. Well, there's only 2 leaders that are over that, 2 student leaders that are over that, but they recruit other students. And so those 2 leaders, they have recruited. So Anaya and Kayla, they're the 2 over there. They have recruited 10 other students. And some of the students they've recruited are kids who normally didn't talk, kids who really don't do anything, but they loved on them and they encouraged them. And now these kids are on the doors welcoming people in. So it's that.
Yeah. You got 10. It sounds like you got 10 or so students leading, but then they're inviting other students to serve. I mean, so you might have, who knows, 40 or 50 students serving in roles, which again makes sense for that size. I mean, 175, 200 students. Right. You need a lot of people doing different things to make it work. That's awesome. Right. Now, I want to go back to the training. You mentioned you train February to August, which of course makes sense with the football schedule you mentioned earlier. Well planned. What's the content? Is it the same every year? Do you kind of create it as you go? What's that look like?
And so we use some of the Orange content, the XP things that Orange has for students. And I actually went to Orange at the last conference. There was some great student information that Orange is coming out with specifically for leaders. And so I encourage every family pastor and youth pastor to check that out on just specific content for student leaders. And so what we'll do, and here's something we're working on, Nick, and not to just take it down this rabbit hole, but what we're working on, and I've even talked to some main Orange leaders too, is building a leadership curriculum that meets a lot of our African American and Hispanic students in their context, just making the material stretch across the landscape so it works for everybody. Because what happens is a lot of times we have to modify the curriculum to make it fit where we are. There's nothing wrong with that. It enhances us. It helps us work together as a team, but we have to modify some of the curriculum to make it work. But that's the time we spend now. So in the fall and early winter, we're creating content for the next year. So what our general theme will be, what we want our leaders to know, what we want our students to do. So for instance, 2020 is our year of better. Just better. Everybody will talk about in 2020 how 2020 vision means you have perfect vision, you see clearer. So our attitude is if God has allowed our vision to be clear, we should live our lives better in every way. And so right now we're working on that. So I have a team of adult leaders, and in the room are 3 student leaders that help us dream what better will look like for 2020. Because a lot of mistakes ministries make is that they have adults sitting around the table making stuff for teens and never get the teens' opinion.
Yes, yeah.
And so adults, you're thinking you're killing it, and the teens are like, I'm just here so I won't get fined. So,
nice. That's awesome.
And they're really not engaged in it. So bringing teens to the table helps your team win. That's a lot of T's, but it's a true. Like bringing your team to the table helps your teams win.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have like a few questions right on my head. I'd love to go down the rabbit hole a little bit and hear a little bit more from you about how there's a need for a leadership student curriculum that would fit your context, how you have to tweak what's already out there. Because on one hand, I feel like there's not a lot of student leadership content anyway. I mean, I interviewed Doug from Leader Treks on the podcast not long ago, and that's what they do. But outside of that, and there's some, but again, there's not like a ton. So I'd love to hear you tell me more about what needs to be adapted, what could be created that would fill that void. I know you said you're talking with Orange. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So what we discovered is that youth ministry in the predominantly African American context has only really been embraced for the last maybe 10 to 12 years. So it's student ministry at the level of what it needs to be is a new concept in a lot of our African American churches. So with that, even with it being just a short amount of time, there's not a lot of content on it anyway. It's a brand new lane that people are running in. So it's like trying to figure out what it actually looks like. Because and so with that, it's finding material that creates a Jesus model type of leadership and not really an ethnic style of leadership. That makes sense. To where we're teaching our Black kids not to look at leadership a Black way, but a Jesus way. Gotcha. Right? To be engaged and to be knowledgeable of the social injustices that plague African American people and things that are going on in our culture, but not to let your ethnicity override your Christianity. And so that's the angle we're coming at leadership, to where you can't allow social things to impact your salvation, if you will. Like it can't. People's hatred towards each other, social injustices can't get you to the point to where you're not loving people, to where you're not being like Jesus to people. And so we have to modify our curriculum and our messages of leadership to that, because with all due respect, a predominantly white student leadership ministry won't face the things that our students will face.
Yeah, and then the curriculum wouldn't even mention it. It's kind of what I would. Yeah, well, so you want that talked about, and it's probably not talked about in most resources. Yeah. So we have to teach our teens. So how do you lead effectively? How do you lead like Jesus when a kid from your school is brutalized or killed by police? And there's an uproar in your community, uproar in your school, and people are upset. People are mad. How do you lead? For instance, I don't know if you heard about it in Baltimore, but it's been all over the nation. The story here in Dallas with Amber Geiger, the former police officer that killed a man in his apartment. Yeah, and there was because the trial wrapped up or something like that. Yeah. So
it's been crazy here in Dallas. With so many conspiracy stories, so many things going on, but having to come to our Connect Bible study and our leadership and teach our teens, how do you go to school and talk to students that were mad that the brother hugged and forgave the police officer?
Yeah.
Like, because there were people upset with that. They felt like it shouldn't have happened. So as a Christian leader, one, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about forgiveness? Because you can't effectively lead if you don't embrace forgiveness. I'm not saying you have to do what he did, but there's no way you can effectively lead if you don't believe in forgiveness.
Sure.
And so just conversations like that. And there aren't curriculums that meet that need. So we have to modify. And I don't even know, Nick, if there's a way to because what you don't want to do is create a whole curriculum that focuses in on social injustice or focuses in on the racism we see in America. You don't want to just build it for that, but you do need some things in curriculum that addresses that for both the Black kid that has to lead in that environment with other Black kids, and for the white student who needs to be enlightened and know that, hey, this is what some of your Black Christian teens go through. You may not experience it, but this is what happens. And so taking a sidebar from that, we've been very intentional in Dallas about bringing our Black and white kids to the table to talk about their experiences. I have friends that pastor predominantly white churches, and so we get our kids together to have these hard conversations, to talk about what does systematic oppression mean? What does white privilege mean? What is Do you believe it's alive in America? What do you see in your schools? What is the pulse in your school? What do kids talk about? And so getting them to a conversation, because I believe if we don't empower this generation to love each other, to think outside the box, to look outside the box, we're going to lose them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's awesome that you're working. I mean, it sounds like there's so much, again, kingdom-minded work going on there where you're partnering with other churches, other Black churches to reach those students, but then predominantly white churches and getting them together. That's just awesome. I don't know that that's true everywhere. I do feel like, I feel like I grew up in an era where churches really didn't partner with each other much. There was like competition. And I do feel like the landscape of that has changed a lot. It's like, hey, we're all not doing as well as we'd like. Let's just acknowledge we're on the same team. But I don't know that there's that level of partnership like you're talking about there. That's awesome. I had one other question, because as you were talking about that with students and the need to talk about these other things that, of course, a lot of curriculums aren't going to talk about. What does that look like for adults, though? Is the same challenge there, or do you feel like because of the way that is led and discussed or preached in a Black church that those topics are discussed, especially because I'm thinking messages on a Sunday, you're writing your own messages, or is there a need there too? Is there a void it's a tangent, but is there a void in adult ministry just like there is with student ministry?
Absolutely. And so there needs to be a focus in that area as well. And that's one thing we share at our staff meetings and share with other pastors, the need to make sure that if we're being intentional about making sure our students are loving well and loving right, we have to be intentional about our adult leaders as well. And so I think a lot of times we dismiss it. We'll go through a week of our feelings. We'll come to church. We'll mask those feelings. We'll worship. We'll receive a word, and we'll leave only to feel the same way we did when we walked in, because nobody's addressing it, right? So does a white pastor need to stand before his congregation and preach about social injustice? Does a Black pastor need to stand before his congregation and preach about social injustice every Sunday? Absolutely not. But there should be something said from leadership about what our country faces from the correct perspective and how people should respond to it. Getting away from our own ideas and our own concepts of what ethnicity and racism looks like in America. No, we have to look at this right and wrong. Like when things happen in our country, there's a group of people that may not look like us, but that are hurting. How do we comfort them? Even if we don't understand, even if we don't know, how do we comfort them? And the same is true for those who are receiving. How do we receive the comfort that's given? When somebody who doesn't look like me is trying to reach out to comfort or to even realize what I'm going through, how do I receive that? How do I embrace that? So there's a lot of work to be done on both sides. And so just a more intentional conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, definitely. I think about our one of the churches that we helped plant, and their context is certainly different. And I think, and they're trying to be a church that is as people from all races, nationalities, right? But they're in a community where it's pretty much white church, Black church, and then there's some others, but for the most part, it's a largely segregated church community, and none of the churches are large, quite frankly. Again, it's the opposite of like where you are. You've got all these 5,000 churches. Right. I don't know if there's like maybe not even one 500 church in this specific part of the area, and they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it. It's not as racially diverse as they want, because I think it's 60% Black in that area, and their church is probably more like 40% or 35% Black. But they're learning one of the things, and the white leaders in that church, and one of the things they're learning is just how different that is culturally. For example, like when you talked about what you just said, I think one of the things they've realized is, and what they've seen is in the Black church, there's more conversation about what's going on in the community, and whether, and almost with anything, but certainly with racial injustice, or if there was brutality. I mean, anything. Actually, it doesn't even have to be about race. It could just be violence, right? Anything like that. And and that's just not, I don't think, a typical common thing in a lot of white churches. And so they're figuring that out. How do we navigate that? How does this feel like a home where we talk about these issues? We don't run from them. But so it's interesting. It's new for them, and they're exploring it, I think, in a good way, but they don't know. They're learning right now.
And what we have to do in a lot of our, and I mentioned this to a lot of leaders in our diverse churches here, like you can't say you're a diverse church if you only have diversity on Sunday morning in your worship service. You are a diverse church when you have different ethnicities. If the staff of your church represents the people in your community,
Yes. And I don't know. I mean, I guess there probably are some exceptions, but I rarely see a diverse church that isn't diverse on staff to begin with.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I've never heard TD Jake say it, but I've heard Reggie Joyner quote TD Jake saying, if I don't see me, it's not for me, which is a great way to say that. I don't know that it probably exists somewhere, but I don't see it a lot. And that's one of the things they're doing too, is they do have a diverse staff. They do have to continue to fight for it, because some of the guy that planted came from out of town. Some of his friends, they're white. He's white, and so they came with him. They have had to continue to grow the diversity of the church, and they're doing a great job. But that's a good point. I don't think you get there if the staff isn't diverse.
And it's just so you can have a clear understanding of people who you wouldn't normally have a run-in or have a sit-down conversation with. It's amazing. So when we talk about our diverse churches, even churches who are diverse, Texas, Maryland, wherever, the only time they really are in each other's space is on Sunday morning. So you have no idea what this family may go through outside of that Sunday morning worship service. So to have somebody on staff that's not just a Hispanic face or Black face or Asian face, whatever, just somebody who represents the people in your church to help leaders understand how to navigate some of these tough conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so when a story takes over national headlines and people come to your church with different opinions and different ideals, do you have somebody on staff who can speak to every level of it?
That's a good question.
And we have to. And if there's nobody on your staff, does your pastor know somebody who can come in and speak to the people? You know what I mean? So there has to be some type of connection there to where because especially when it comes to our family ministries, because here's what happens. And I told Sam Collier this a couple of years ago when we were talking about some Orange curriculum. I said, I watched an Orange video and they were talking about how every child is made in God's image. And I looked at this video and I didn't see not one Black kid on the video. And so I said, I can't play this video at my church, because if my children sit and watch this video and the Bible and the video is saying that all children are made in God's image and they don't see any child that looks like them, that speaks to them. Okay, well, they're made in God's image. Well, what about me?
Yeah.
I don't see anybody that looks like. So we had to, and Sam, and even talking to Reggie, was like, wow, okay, we get it. We never thought about that. We were just trying to make sure to relay this concept and bring this concept to pass. And so now you see, and I told Reggie this at conference, I love the way Orange is being more intentional about reaching the whole church.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think it's great that you and Sam and people are helping them. I know for Reggie, I remember, gosh, I feel like the last few years after tour, if I get to see him, I'll talk about one of my favorite moments is the table conversations, which a lot of times are about race in the church and things like that. And his question is always, do you think we did it well? I feel like we could do more. Like, how did it really go? I mean, there's always like this posture of pressing to do better there. Right. So I do appreciate that about him, and that's a good thing. Absolutely.
And I think every entity that is like Orange or every church needs to embrace that. Let's just have the hard conversations, and let's see how we can meet each other where we need to, so we can live in this world and impact the world for Jesus together.
Absolutely, man. This is a good conversation. We went a direction I didn't know we'd go, and I'm glad we went. We could talk forever. Yeah, we could talk forever about this. I am going to, after we sign off here, I'm gonna have a couple other questions for you, and maybe I'll see it next too. But I'd love to get you back on, even if to talk maybe more about this, maybe even young adults. Young adults is one of those ministries. We don't talk a whole lot on the podcast about it. But I'd love to. I think it's a good thing. So how can people connect with you? If they have questions, want to follow you on social media, something like that?
So on Twitter and Instagram, it's R.E. Purvey, R.E.P.U.R.V.E.Y, R.E. Purvey. And on Facebook, it's Robert E. Purvey. So on Twitter and Instagram, it's R.E. Purvey. And then on Facebook, Robert E. Purvey. Very easy to find.
All right, man. Well, thank you for taking time to come on the podcast. You got a great thing going there with your church and with the ministry, partnering with schools and other churches. Man, that's just awesome. Thanks for taking time to share with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, I feel like we could have talked for another hour or two or something like that, especially where the conversation started to go at the end there. That's always intriguing to me. I love having those conversations with other leaders and kind of, I don't know, pulling back the pretense and just being real and having real conversations, asking real questions, all that stuff. And so I enjoyed that with Robert. I'm surely probably going to want to talk to him again when I see him, hopefully at Next in January. But I hope this was helpful to you as well. And a few action items I thought of coming out of this interview would be, one, connect with a school. How can you connect with a school to reach students that way, serve the school, make that connection relationally? Another action step, how can you connect with another youth pastor? You heard about the network they have and what they're able to do with that. And all of that comes from relationship and, of course, his longevity being there for as long as he's been there. And then have a conversation about race, about demographics, about who you're reaching, about, is your church reaching the community? Does the church look like the community or not? Are there things that you're not talking about that should be talked about? I think those would be great conversations to have with people in your church, with people outside the church, and all of that. So I hope that was, something that was helpful for you to listen to. I certainly enjoyed that conversation. I look forward to more conversations with Robert down the road. Like I mentioned in the beginning, you can get all the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 169. So that's it for this week. Hope you have a great week. Hope you get everything done on your plate. But more than that, I hope you can help somebody take steps towards following Jesus and growing their faith. And for all of us that lead and serve in ministry, I hope we'll prioritize our own faith and our own growth and our own relationship with God, because it's easy to push that out. So that's just something that's been on my mind. I don't know if that is something you're thinking about as well, or if that's a challenge for you, just like it is for me, but I'm thinking about that for you. Let's all focus on that, the thing that's most important this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing, for sharing, all that. And I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.